My name is Erica Houston, and I am the gallery director here at Peters Valley. And I am so excited to welcome you to Stephen Carty's Artist Lecture. And thank you all so much for joining us on such a beautiful evening. Tonight, we are fortunate to have sponsorship from the Mid-Atlantic Arts Folk and Traditional Arts Community Projects Program for both this lecture and Carty's exhibition, Traditional Basketry and Beyond, that is currently on view in the gallery. Stephen is a renowned basket weaver and a local resident of Mount Holly here in New Jersey. He has been a friend of Peters Valley for years, teaching workshops, volunteering for demonstrations at our annual Art in the Park, and now exhibiting his amazing work in our gallery. I want to say thank you to Stephen as well for displaying your works with us and for taking time to tell us all a little bit more about your process. If you have any questions during the lecture, please feel free to send them to me in the chat or in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and I will read them during the Q&A time at the end. Without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Stephen.
Hello everybody. Stephen Carty, basket weaver. I have the gallery at Peters Valley currently for Bark and Vine, traditional basketry and beyond. I'm very thankful to Peters Valley for this opportunity to have my first ever gallery, basketry gallery. I'm still just, wow, blown away by it. I've been doing basketry since I was 11 years old. My mother, Mary Carty, she's a basket weaver. She had taught me basket weaving. From then, I just went on to just do regular basket weaving, sort of bread basket, doorknob baskets, you name it. Later on, I was influenced by a forger named Doug Elliott. I'd taken forging classes from him, and he actually made Bark and Vine baskets. I never took his class, but the stuff he made kind of stayed with me. I always remembered it. And years later, I do so much forging out in the wilderness, I just decided I should just incorporate this into my basketry. And slowly but surely, I start adding more, bark and vine work, start researching how to gather the bark, how to gather the vines, when to gather them, where to gather them, what kind of bark and vines work. A lot of it was troubleshooting. Over the years, I've found some materials don't work as well as others. A lot of folks use grapevine. That's crazy about grapevine. I found wisteria works really good, and I'll get into that also. It's invasive. A lot of traditional basketry I do falls in like two kinds of categories. You have technically what's a bark container, and that's one piece of bark that's folded over. Like, I'm used to stuff like this, like the hickory. That's inner bark of hickory that I've harvested myself out of the wild, or tulip poplar. And I have some of these materials on display in the gallery. So with the bark, the containers are basically stitched together. There's some basket weavers out there, purists are like, well, it's not woven, but more than half the basket weavers consider that a basket. Then I have the basketry where it is woven to get woven out of vines. And there's some bark in there for the splints, and the rest, the weavers, is vines. Materials vary. I've done tulip poplar. I've done solid hickory bark baskets, just all hickory, paper mulberry, solid paper mulberry. I like to mix media though, a lot, different materials. I'll make even cordage and add in. So wisteria is one of my favorites. I mentioned that a little earlier. With the invasives, I've been slowly trying to shift from the wild materials to the invasives. They're both wild materials, but I mean the native. The native materials, I'm a little more conscious about gathering them. Like tulip poplar and hickory, it's getting harder and harder for me to find spots to harvest these materials because I have to kill a tree to do that. But where I'm harvesting a tree, I'm finding, the trees that are not, they're overgrown. So it's areas where they're more branch free, they're struggling to compete with other trees. So I'm going in there, I'll thin it out a little bit. Or I find land where, it's going to become a strip mall, or my last tulip poplar harvest spot became a liquor store on 206. I can't harvest there anymore, it's gone. So I'll find spots are going to be destroyed. It could be cedar bark, it could be anything. And I'll go in there and I'll pull mostly native materials out of there. But I've been gravitating more and more to the wild invasives. So wisteria, honeysuckle, paper mulberry. Wisteria is one of the greatest ones I've worked with so far. I've loved working that with students. I taught a class in this at Peters Valley, and that was Labor Day weekend 2021. I was a great class, a 5-day class. Everybody enjoyed it. And one of the main ingredients, the main materials we used was the wisteria bark. the vines, because you can actually pull the bark off the wisteria and form cordage off of that. So I can actually double my materials with wisteria, and it grows like insane. It's like every year to every other year, I can harvest from the same spot because I'm after the runners, and that's how it colonizes from one tree to another. So by doing that, I'm actually doing the wilderness a favor, and I'm limiting the invasive spread of invasives. Gathering materials is half the work with basketry. I often get asked how long it takes to make these baskets, and yeah, sure, I can probably make 2 arrow quivers, bark arrow quivers in a day. My hands will be shot if I do that. That's if everything goes right there. Sometimes materials, things just aren't working out right. But the other half the work is what people don't see, especially don't see, which is the harvest. So I really can't say, oh, I made those 2 quivers in one day. There's probably like 2 more days worth of work just in pulling materials out of the woods. Whether I'm felling a tree like hickory, if I take down a hickory tree, there's a process to that. You have to take down the tree, and then you have to peel with a draw knife, you have to peel off the outer bark. And then from there, you have to peel it off just enough, and then you pull off the inner bark. And then from there, it gets cut down, and whether it's strips for lashing or rarely when I make a solid hickory bark, the full sides, the material. So it's a lot of labor in gathering materials. That's something people really don't think about, the labor that goes into it. When I start with basket weaving, just doing baskets with rattan, which I still do. I still teach that way, especially beginning classes, beginners. It's a lot of people don't think about it. You buy your round reed, you buy a spool of this, a spool of that, maybe ½ round, a 1/4 inch, half round, a half oval. Whatever size you're using, you buy it. You get a whole hank of it, and you don't think, a lot of basket weavers don't think about who had to process that material, where it came from. I do like doing this. It's more of a challenge because I'm in control of my materials. I'm going out in the woods. I'm finding the materials. Quality control, it's right here. I have to make sure that the material is going to work. There's sometimes I get a tree and just, the bark's not working, or I'm pulling some vines in a spot and it's like something's just not right. And that can happen. The land can be a little fickle like that sometimes. So I got some spots where really good. With the wisteria, I find some places where the runners are really nice and run really long. I can get like 6-foot sections of just pulling up a runner. And I like the runners because it's a combination of root and vine. We're just pulling a vine out off a tree. It's flexible, but it's not quite as, flexible as a root. But that runner is like the best of both worlds. It's funny, especially the wisteria, because I feel like I have to unweave the forest floor to get them, because they will grow over each other and under each other across the forest floor while I'm pulling these runners up. Other materials I use, honeysuckle. I don't use honeysuckle as much. I find it a little more brittle. It's a little harder to process, but it's very useful. Our local wild grapevine, I've actually had to stop using that because we have some issues with invasive species beyond plants, invasive insects. Spotted lanternfly down my way has really put a damper on gathering wild grapevine. Last summer, I made this giant basket for a place, and it was a burn basket for an installation somewhere else. They actually burned it. Long story though, but I had to find material that was going to be more flammable, so I opted for wild grapevine. I had a heck of a time finding enough last summer, because the lanternflies were all over it, and they were just killing the grapevines. So climate change, invasive species, all these things come to mind when I'm out there gathering materials. Like I said, I had to kill trees. I got to pull vines. That's part of the whole circle of life. I got to be careful. I don't have to do it responsibly. It's a question I always get from people. It's like, you had to kill that tree. Yeah, I had to. Don't want to get the material though. Same with the vines. In general, I'd say, question I guess, how hard is it to do the vine and bark work? It's not hard as in like, it's hard, but it's not hard. It's hard in that you're putting in some heavy labor. Your hands are going to hurt, especially with the harvesting materials, even weaving materials. I've always warned my students, like if you have some issues with arthritis or, you have some kind of hand injury, it can irritate it. Fortunately though, when I do teach the bark and vine work, we shift with different styles of weaving. So it's a bark container or a woven container, which is totally different, something woven. We'll shift in what we're doing. Usually I do a lot of twining too with the bark and vine work. I find twining is very, very conducive for that, because you have different kinds of weaves of basketry. You have a basket weavers here, you know, you have start, stop weave. Say if you're making a bread basket or anything from that to a wool drying basket, you'll have start, stop, where you build a row, then you build a next row, then you build a next row. They have continuous weave, like a doorknob and some other baskets where it's slowly spiraling up. But I like the twining. So the twining, I wish I had a basket here to show you, but the twining is where the material is same piece going in and out like that and kind of twists. Imagine a rope, but between the rope, you'll have all those staves of the basket. It makes a much stronger basket, and I find it it really helps with the wild materials. It's very conducive for, you know, stuff like that. Now, some of my materials come out of the pine barrens. A lot of the cedar bark does. Believe it or not, some of my hickory bark has come out of the pines, and even the wisteria. I found some spots in the pine barrens where the wisteria has started taking over a little bit. Now, the pine barrens is not real conducive for wisteria to grow, very acidic soil. There's not a lot of materials I find out there, but there are some. I mean, it's a plethora if you're making white oak baskets, which is a whole another thing. I'm not doing white oak. That's different than this bark and vine work. A lot of materials though, I often get from around here off the Rancocas Creek. Paddle my canoe out. I find a canoe is very good for gathering materials. I can load a canoe up. I can haul back materials in the canoe. So sometimes I'll have to camp out. I'll get a spot way down the Rancocas. Rancocas is the only creek that the creek that I've been harvesting off of, because it's a huge 17-foot canoe, aluminum canoe. So, you know, only a couple of blocks of the creek for me, and I'll put in from there, and I'll get down the creek, and I got a couple spots where I'll go harvest vines or harvest bark, and you know, camp out for a couple of days and bring back, you know, a good canoe load of stuff. That's the other thing too, the bark, the native materials and the invasives. The one difference too, a lot of the native stuff like the hickory and the tulip poplar, I actually have a season for bark. It's end of May, beginning of June. That's the only time when the hickory or the tulip poplar will really pop off the tree. It's like I said, it's a whole process. So it's a hickory shaving it, you know, halfway down, or tulip poplar, and just, you know, cut the tree down. I cut the lines I have to, and then from there I work the bark off slowly. I have tools for that. Get my hands down and into there, and then pop the whole piece of bark off, like a big cylinder of bark comes off. It'd be like a loud pop with tulip poplar because pop sound. It's like a sleeve, like a big cylinder of bark. But it's a window of time I can do that. So what I've done over the years, I've got to where I have these couple of weeks where I'll go out in the woods, and I know that's my time to get bark harvest. I call it bark harvest. So I'll get my tulip poplar and my hickory, and I'll get like maybe 3 or 4 tulip poplars, maybe 2 hickory trees. That's usually my self-imposed quota for the year for what I need just to weave. But yeah, that's the window of time. Otherwise, it's really hard to get that bark off. Some stuff like cedar bark, it's more lenient. I can start earlier on that. I can start April. I can get the bark off all the way until June. After June, by midsummer, you're not getting any bark off the tree very neatly. And it's going to stick. It's going to be hard to get off. It's going to crack. It's going to break. So there's a window of time to do this stuff. I can always bring up that wisteria, but it's easy to gather as long as the ground's not frozen. Anytime in the year I can pull that stuff. Honeysuckle it's best in the spring. Later on in the year, it's a little too brittle. Some of the other plants I have used, bittersweet. I've used bittersweet vines. I've used Virginia creeper, paper mulberry. That one's an invasive. Paper mulberry is amazing. I wish there's more spots of it. I do, but I don't, because it is invasive. I know one spot outside of Philly. I know one spot on this side of the river. In fact, I'm going this week to get some paper mulberry. I made an entire arrow quiver out of paper mulberry once. And to do the arrow quiver, it's like a real narrow basket using, like, usually I use a tulip poplar bark. So be like a sheet of this folded over and scored on the bottom. And then, like I said, fold over in the holes I drill, which with a knife, which I'll get to that. But paper mulberry, you use the lashings from paper mulberry, the solid part of the quiver from paper mulberry. You can pound it and make like a crude paper lining for the inside. The only problem I had paper mulberry is it molds real easily. So you got to keep it away from moisture, but really amazing material to work with. I'm going to start working with that a little more. Another thing I should mention is that when I make these baskets, I use only hand tools. I have nothing against electric tools, but it always feels like it's taking away from, you know, what I'm doing in the woods. I like to say, I tell my students, you should be able to learn how to do it like you could do it all with a knife. Now it'd be a lot longer, it'd be a lot more tedious, but pretty much anything you can do to make a basket from the wild like that, all you really need is a knife, good sharp knife. And do the shears work a little better? Yeah. Do some cutters work, like pruners work better for gathering vines? Yeah. Does a draw knife work better for shaving off the bark from a tool, hickory log? Yeah. But yeah, you could do it all with a knife. And I like to always push that skill with students, like challenge yourself a little bit. Use a knife once in a while. Like try to do just a basket with a knife, or try processing materials with just a knife. So when I teach, I often like to show students that knife skills of how to process this stuff with just a knife. Like I said, with the wild tools, I mean, not the hand tools, it doesn't feel right using electric tools. I always feel like these baskets are from nature, from the wilderness. It's my art, it's what I'm creating, but sometimes I feel like the woods has its own story to tell. And in some ways I'm letting the woods tell its own story. And, I think the woods has enough machines going out there and wreaking havoc. And it's more satisfying too. I can go out there just some hand tools, and I don't worry about batteries going dead or anything like that. It's me and nature, and my hand tools, and what I can make from that. So it's very satisfying. I enjoy doing it. I should probably talk about early on with basketry. Like I said, I learned from my mother, Mary Carty. I was always very, I don't want to say bored, but I would easily get bored with just traditional designs. Like I didn't want to just keep making a bread basket. I didn't want to keep making a doorknob. Do I teach those? Yes, absolutely. I teach a lot of beginning basketry classes in rattan. But I always wanted to challenge myself. I did a basket once with horsehair, coiled basket, instead of pine needle, just to see if I could do it. Turned out not bad. Turned out pretty good. I still have that basket somewhere. But this was a way for me to challenge myself a little more in basketry. I found a way like, I didn't see a lot of people, basket weavers, doing this. Like I said, early influenced Doug Elliott, he was doing it, but I never did get to learn off him. And I didn't see him doing vine work. I saw him doing a lot of, his work was very different. The commonality is the bark containers I do make are very reminiscent of what Doug was doing. And I know he was making, based off what, and the Appalachians, the bark containers, a lot of folks traditionally would make these tulip poplar, lashwood hickory bark containers, little ones, only like, that big for gathering, like that big for gathering berries. I remember seeing him make those, but like I said, I didn't take his class. I took a foraging class, but what I did learn from him was cordage, making cordage. And I have used that in some of my basket work. So definitely I cite him as an influence, even though he wasn't a teacher. So I would really like to cite just my mother as my original teacher, teaching me basketry. So teaching me the techniques, and then definitely Doug Elliott for the inspiration, and just my own ventures in the woods for inspiration too. Like I said, I've been researching different materials, and sometimes just try something different. Just remember, don't grab poison ivy. And that's another thing people don't think about when you're doing this stuff out there, is gloves are important. A good pair of leather gloves. Some people I know feel funny about leather, but a good pair of leather gloves will save your hands. I said leather because there's times when you're processing materials, like I said, a lot of knife work. There's times I've slipped, I've cut myself. My girlfriend's cut herself real bad recently. I was showing her how to weave on a bottle, and I told her to put a glove on, but I wasn't paying attention. I should have, seen that she didn't have a glove on. But yeah, the glove will save your hand. And also when you're pulling these vines out in the woods, you can come in contact with poison ivy. Just because you know what poison ivy looks like and you see it, okay, it's on that tree, it's not on this tree. Those roots grow underground. And a lot of people don't stop to think about that. I'm very careful with materials when I do take up the Peters Valley. I wash all those in baby pools outside. I wash all those roots off first, real good. I clean them off. I'm very careful I gather, but there's still always that chance, you get poison ivy. But it's very limited. I limit it when I teach classes. Like I haven't had anybody get poison ivy yet because I'm careful where I gather roots and the runners, the wisteria. You'll mostly encounter that with wisteria, or if you're gathering something like spruce root, which I've read about, but I have not had the opportunity to gather that and try that for basket weaving. We don't have a lot of spruce trees here. So there are some materials here that aren't here that I would love to try. chestnut bark. And I know American chestnut trees is dead, but died off. But you have a invasive one, like I shouldn't say invasive, it's naturalized. It's just not. It's not from here originally. It's definitely not invasive. It's an Asian chestnut, Chinese chestnut. That bark you can use. It works very good from what I've read. I've been told. Another one I have used a little bit is elm bark. Sarsaparilla roots. I've been dying to try sarsaparilla roots. Wild sarsaparilla. It's a plant that grows around here in the woods and has a runner that keeps running underground and interconnects with each plant. So you get a long string of them. So I've been toying with the idea of trying to weave those. I was actually kicking around an idea to do an elm, slippery elm basket. A few slippery elm trees have been eyeing up. There's plenty enough to gather once in a while. There's not a huge amount of them. So I dabble with slippery elm once in a while. But slippery elm, you can actually grind that up if you had to and eat slippery elm. It's edible. So I always toy with this idea in the back of my head about, I want to make a little basket, a little pack basket that's slippery elm and woven with sarsaparilla root, because sarsaparilla root is also another native edible. Not something you want to write home like, oh, this tastes great kind of edible, but there's a lot of old like mountain man stories about people had to survive off bark and roots they learned from the natives. So as an inspiration, I'm like, maybe I should try that. Maybe I should try weaving a basket that you could eat if you had to. I mean, it'd probably take too many calories you'd burn trying to consume your basket. But I'm always trying to push the boundary. Recently, I started weaving on bottles. That's been really interesting. That's something new. I've just started within the past 2 months. Two of those are in Peters Valley right now. And one is a mason jar, a planter that I wove on an old mason jar. So weaving on a glass is pretty fun so far. I've just started working with my cousin, who he's a bottle hunter, amongst being a taxidermist and lots of other amazing arts he does. But I've been working with him a lot, and he's been finding bottles for me out in the woods. So I'm looking at potentially weave on antique bottles, antique milk bottles. I want to find a way that I can weave on them and still have like the name of the dairy and stuff like that showing. You can see it's an antique bottle. I still have to do a fish trap. A lot of people are bringing that up. Like, when are you going to weave a fish trap? I haven't tried yet. I've been thinking about it, but I think a lot of people tend to go fish trap if they're doing this kind of wild weaving. That's the thing I kind of come across the most, whether it's online. Somebody wove this or somebody wove that. I don't see as many pack baskets. I haven't seen anybody weaving wild stuff with bottles yet. I just thought of it and I started doing it. And I'm always receptive to ideas too, whether students or my apprentice or anybody. They have an idea. I'm like, what's your idea? My apprentice recently, she just told me about she was making cordage with honeysuckle bark. I had no idea you could pull the bark. I mean, I do it with wisteria. You can make a cordage off the wisteria bark. I never stopped to think like, I should try this honeysuckle bark. She said it makes a very nice cordage though. And cordage is a really important skill to learn, whether you're doing basketry or just survival skill. I mean, a rope is one of the things civilization's founded on, is the ability to make some kind of rope or cord. And I like to add that in my baskets often. It's a good skill to have, and it's something I think just gives a little more texture to the basket instead of just vines or just bark. I mean, it is bark or the vine, but you're transforming it a little further, a little extra. I think cordage means a lot to me in my basketry. Cordage is very representative of what I'm doing with my basketry. Every time I have a piece of cordage and I'm making it, anyone's made cordage before, you're taking two pieces of material, you're taking one piece, you've twisted it, twist against itself. If you ever done it, twist something, a piece of material, twist against itself, you're starting a cord. And those two pieces will keep overlapping each other, going in the same direction, but against themselves. It reminds me of what basketry is for me. It's, utility and aesthetics. It's like this war between the two almost. It's not quite a war, but this like struggle between the two of, I want a basket to be something utilitarian and strong and usable. The basket you've all seen in the postcard and on the pictures for Peters Valley from my gallery, the real tall one with a handle. I made that for carrying walnuts or hickory nuts. That was made with an intention of the gatherer. But so there it is, a utilitarian use for that basket. But I also wanted it to have, a nice aesthetic. That's why it's part of its peeled wisteria vines and solid wisteria vines. And you look on the bottom of its grapevine, and then I actually left the outer bark on the tulip poplar instead of shaving it down like I usually do. So it's a constant battle between utility and aesthetics. It's like I want to keep that balance between them. If I had to sacrifice one for the other, at the end of the day, it's going to be I'll sacrifice the aesthetics because utility is what a basket was originally used for. It's one of the first tools humans probably made was not the first, but one of the first was baskets, something woven to carry stuff in. I always say everybody somewhere in your ancestry, somebody wove something. They wove some kind of basket. You go far enough back. It's common. It's common in every culture. It's common in every place. There's someone that wove. But so yeah, that's what the cordage represents for me. That struggle and how there's two. They don't really hurt each other. That makes a basket better when you have that struggle between utility and aesthetics. It's you're pushing yourself to make that basket whole and make it strong, but make it look good at the same time. And that's something I value with basketry, is that struggle in and of itself. Yes, some days basketry, I see people say, "Oh, this looks relaxing." No, some days it does feel like a little bit of a struggle. There's times when I'm out in the woods gathering materials and I'm getting bug bitten or I'm getting rained on, or it is what it is. Like I said, that window of time for the tulip poplar and the hickory. So there's that. There's land issue struggles I sometimes deal with. That, and I don't mind talking about it. It comes up. There's problems with gathering materials at times. I just can't go into any public land and gather what I want, even if it's invasive. I've had some run-ins with, I guess you say authorities at times. Misunderstandings is like I'd like to call it. And then you can't just go on private property and take something, which I have. If somebody's land is like like I said, my one harvest place became a liquor store. Someone didn't care about that land really. So there's times to see a posted sign private property, and I've seen the same signs, whether it's somebody's woods or it's a patch of woods being destroyed to make a Walmart. You see the same mass-produced sign, and it hurts me to think that people really don't care about the land as much. It's, as I always say, I'm very conscious of that when I'm out there gathering materials and making these baskets. Like I don't like the view of some people have of putting nature on a pedestal. It's something better than them. Don't tread on it. Don't touch it. And yet the other side, like put it on the shovel. Like progress. Let's just build up whatever we can. I'm not in line with either of those views. And my basketry, I feel, is part of my protest against that. Like it's like my way of saying I'm part of the land. This land is just, it's not just a piece of ground. It's what nourishes us. It's what we come from. It's if we had this land to tread on, what would we have? And so I feel like my basketry is part of that. Silently, it's my way of protesting that. And in action, just going out getting materials sometimes in a responsible and sustainable way. You can do it sustainably. I say a lot of people I get a little criticism sometimes. I'm killing trees, but I'm doing it in a sustainable way. Like sustainability, I should talk about that a little more. It's very important. Like I said, it's to gather invasives and learn more about removing these invasives as much as you can. Some invasives don't work well. I try, like tree of heaven, that the lanternflies love it. It's a horrible weaving material. It's too thin. But I tried it. Didn't work out. Paper mulberry, like I said, it's a great one. Wisteria, it's a great one. Honeysuckle, it's not my favorite, but my apprentice loves it. So some people like it. So if there's something invasive, I always urge people learn how to weave with that. Make something. Maybe you're weaving something other than a basket. Find some use for. Wattle fences are interesting. I always want to do that. If I wasn't busy weaving baskets, I'd probably weave a wattle fence. It's a woven fence for a garden. A lot of native tribes did that. Probably a lot of indigenous people all over the world probably. They're making stuff like that, woven products, which just wasn't a basket. Woven mats. There's a whole world of stuff to weave out there, and there's a whole bunch of invasives out there. I mean, I don't discourage people from using the native materials either, but I'd like to remind them, do it in a very responsible and very sustainable way. Be very careful with it. I don't like letting things go to waste. Last time I showed a friend and a peer, another artist, I showed her how to harvest hickory, and she took the wood. So the wood didn't go to waste. Friends are carvers. Sometimes they take the tulip poplar. So yeah, I don't like to let things go to waste. I always find some use for it. Sometimes some wood had to just be firewood. It wasn't really good for anything.
We are getting a lot of questions about some different materials. Do you mind if I ask you a couple of those along the way here?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I love questions. I'm used to getting more questions as I'm talking. So as you can tell.
So we've got a whole bunch, so I'm just going to list off some of the materials for you. We've got questions about if you use lilac or bamboo.
Excellent. I've never used lilac. That would be very interesting. I would like to try that. Lilac reminds my grandmother as her favorite flower. And I think I'm going to look into that for sure. Bamboo, there's a right way to do it. I don't know it. I saw a video of somebody doing it once. It was amazing. I tried messing with myself and I cut myself. So it's on the bamboo, not on my knife. Bamboo can be razor sharp. Bamboo, though, is a great material if you know how to process it. I still need to learn how to do that, though. So it's something I need to look into.
I think you mentioned bittersweet vines already, but this may have come in before then. Have you ever used Oriental bittersweet vines?
Yes, there's actually two bittersweets. There's a native bittersweet and the Asian bittersweet. The Asian bittersweet is the invasive one. I can't tell the two apart, though. Just like wisteria, there's actually native wisteria. A friend of mine who lives nearby, he just pointed that out recently. He has the native one growing along his fence of his property, but the invasive is right outside the fence. But bittersweet, you can weave with it. I have woven with it. It's just not my favorite. It's not as flexible as stuff like wisteria, but you can weave with it, absolutely.
All right. Missy also asked about Dutchman's pipe vine or trumpet vine. She said they plague her.
I'm not familiar with any way of weaving that, but I am aware of people making all kinds of interesting medicinal tinctures with that. I'm trying to remember. There's one done for pain. I forget how it's done. It's for like a pain salve or tincture, and then there's I know the Lenape had a thing they do where you'd soak it in water. It was good for like sore eyes. Some aware of medicinal uses for that, but I'm not aware of any way you can weave with that. I know the plant, it lacks chlorophyll. It's a very delicate plant.
Maybe figure out a way to work that into your apocalyptic baskets. So there's healing properties too.
Kill for all that ghost pipe she has growing.
We've also got forsythia for weaving the baskets as a plant.
Yeah, forsythia. I've heard of people weaving with it. I have not. My mother probably kill me if I chopped up her forsythia bushes. They're not that big anyway. But I've heard of weaving with forsythia. I just haven't explored that material yet.
We've got a question here about the permissions. You talked about needing to harvest on different lands. And specifically, do you need to have permission to harvest in the Pine Barrens?
That's an excellent question. That's a yes and no on that. On private property, you don't. You get into public property, let's just say I've had some misunderstandings with park police a couple times, and you just had to clear that up. But yeah, some places are like, you need a permit to even cut wood or gather wood. So it gets tedious. One time, okay, I'll give you a story. One time, it was actually when I taught up at Peters Valley last time in 2021. And as you know, we can't gather anything up there. And I always put that in disclaimer because national, was it recreation park area or whatever it is. So, but down here, there was, in Brennan T. Burns State Forest, they had a posting in a local paper about a wisteria pulling group. It's like a group effort. So they had a weekend where like, come and help us remove this invasive wisteria. And then, volunteers need it. So I called the number, and it was for the park. And I said, yeah, if I come and help you just pull it, can I take it with me? And they're like almost like, you weirdo. So they were like, yeah, sure. Okay. And so my apprentice and I showed up, and it was great. I had a crew of a dozen people basically instantly pulling wisteria in the state park, which I normally would not get away with. under the supervision of park naturalist and park police, like helping basically do it. So I was like, wow, that was wisteria I took up to Peters Valley for teaching. I had a huge truckload of it. So, so sometimes things work out in funny ways, you know.
Right. We have a nice comment here about your upcoming class, but also from Rena, she says, "Hi, Steve, what is the best season to harvest the vines? And will you be teaching about the vine baskets in your class in July?" They work full time, but if they can get some days off, they would love to come take your class.
Yes, the class is very heavy in vine work. We'll do bark containers also, we do both. The vine work is not solid vines, it's bark and vine the way it's done. There's bark staves, but it's very heavy vine work. I supply all the vines for that because I'm often worried about somebody brings something, maybe they brought, you know, an invasive, you know, lantern flies are everywhere now, so I'm not worried about that, but maybe they brought something as poison ivy on it. So I don't tell anybody don't bring materials, but I don't encourage it, but somebody does, like, hey, you brought it, we'll work with it. Right now it's a good time to gather vines. Spring, you can gather, you know, bittersweet, you can gather Virginia creeper, definitely wisteria. Like I said, that's all year round wisteria. Honeysuckle, so that stuff, you can start gathering it now.
Okay.
All the way into like early summer, but once summer really kicks in, once June kicks in, it gets a little more brittle. But right in the spring, that sap is running.
Oh, right. So once it's too brittle, if you try to harvest it, it's just going to break into small pieces.
Yeah, like fall, winter, the work. But for some reason, like I said, wisteria being runners, it's flexible, and that's why I can gather that any time of the year. I don't need sap running because it's runners on the ground. That's why I've really gravitated to that, and I really push it a lot because it's invasive and it's the best thing to work with.
Okay,
But
I think this leads great. Sheely asked a great question then. They looked up invasive vines in Hudson Valley, and it gave a nice long list. But what qualities of a vine or fine lengths of tree limbs do you look for when choosing what to use and experiment with in your weavings?
on the vines or the bark of the trees?
It says, what quality of the vines do you look for when choosing to experiment with weaving?
Excellent question. I'm always looking at vines and see, you know, I want a vine that's not real too twist. Sometimes, oh, this curly vine looks really interesting, but doesn't translate well into weaving. So I'm trying to find like the ones going real straight up the tree, or like where I can yank them out of the tree and pull them down. Yeah, so try to find something pretty consistent in diameter and real straight in length going up a tree or along the ground. And that's usually like, oh, let me try this and let me see if it's pliable. So, you know, you find something first. It looks like that might work, but then you have to hands-on, like, I'm going to cut this, I'm going to try it. Oh, that didn't work real well. Let me dry it for a while and let me reconstitute. Let me try it again. And I'd be like, well, this vine snapped. What's the bark like? Let me peel the bark off it and try making cordage out of it. So it's all about trial and error. You just try different materials, and you know, you might get something surprising out of it. Like, wow, this vine is garbage, but the bark on the vine is like amazing. So stuff like that can happen. My apprentice she likes to weave with greenbrier sometimes. I hate it. It's very flexible, but you got to prune those thorns, and she does where she just takes the tip of them off. And it looks really cool, but I'm like, I don't have time for that. But it looks cool. Maybe it's just me talking. I'm being a little envious because, you know, she's doing that. And I'm like, yeah, that's all you, but it looks cool.
Yeah. We did have a follow-up question about the land permissions.
Yeah.
She says, could you clarify no permission needed for private property? I regret that my in-laws took out the wisteria that was running rampant when they moved in to Martha's Vineyard, and would love to take a basket making course. So when you say no permission needed for private property, you mean like your own personal private property?
Your own personal property, or somewhere where it's your own personal property, or you know the place and they're fine with it. For me, there's a few places I do gather where it is public lands, but the local people around there take care of it. They understand stewardship and they know what I'm doing. They know what I'm gathering. It's wisteria. So they're like, hey, it's him. We know what he's doing. We know what he's gathering. especially the one place let's just say I did the trail clearing and it happens to grow over the trail. And I'm like, I'm maintaining the trail. They know I'm maintaining the trail. So stuff like, but that's public property. But the private property, when I do go on without permission, it has always been places where somebody who owns the land and just wants to sell it for commercial real estate reasons. Like I said, my former tulip poplar harvesting area is now a liquor store on 206. It's gone. And I remember the big sign, commercial property for sale. So places like that, I have gone in and, the trees are going to get destroyed anyway. I'm not advocating like, oh, go do this. Like, because you could get in trouble, technically speaking. Probably not, because if they don't give watch my language. If they don't care about the land, they don't care that you're really there. Because if somebody in that case, like, 30 townhomes are going in or a warehouse is going in, you think they really care? If, as I tell people, I think they care if I'm out there pulling some bark and vines, they really don't care. So I'll weigh it out like that. I'm not gonna just go in somebody's woods outside their farm. It's just going to get shot. It's hunting season or something. So I'm very selective when I say I'm going on private property and taking stuff. I'm very selective who's private property. I try to do a little property research, whether it's New Jersey parcels, a site, and you look up, who owns what through tax records. I try to scout out spots before I go in.
Okay.
So.
Sheila also asked, have you ever approached companies that maintain and remove trees for landscaping purposes to harvest your materials from them rather than?
That would be very nice, a nice lucrative deal. The only problem with that is some of the stuff is seasonal. So if somebody were to cut down like a hickory or a tulip poplar in March or July, it's not going to do me any good. So it would have to be like, hey, if you cut down this particular tree at this time of year, especially the trees, that's the tricky thing right there. Somebody might not want to call me just for like that. Oh, okay, where's that bark guy? Like, we happen to get a tree at this time. I would love if that happened, but it'd have to be something like maybe cedar bark. And then they may be like, what do you mean you can't use that tree? I'm like, it's too branchy. It's like, I need branch free. So I think it would take a company where they understand what I'm doing and that I have certain needs where some trees don't work. Because, if somebody's cutting down trees for a different reason, they're not worried about, I go in the woods, I just don't cut down any tree. Like, I'm after cedar bark. I can only get certain cedar trees. I need them branch free where they're overgrown and they're struggling against other cedars or other trees. If they're too branchy, I just pass. I can't use that tree. So it's very selective. And I think a lot of places, they're not going to understand that I'm very selective about what I'm cutting down or what I'm pulling. But that would be awesome if something like that did come about and I could work with some company like that.
I've got, I want to ask, I'm going to pose one more question to you, and then I have a few people that would love to see some examples. So I'm going to kind of show some of them and maybe you can talk about them a little as I show
Absolutely.
them. But we do have another question about while you're working with the materials to actually weave, do you need to hydrate most of those materials while you're working with them?
Excellent question. Absolutely. The wisteria, especially the bark, you have to hydrate the bark. It's going to be brittle. Any of the vines, you have to hydrate it. You can weave with the fresh materials, but it's this weird thing with materials I've noticed. When you use the fresh materials, you can get shrinkage. It sounds really strange, but it's called mellowing. When you dry, you harvest the stuff, you dry it out, and then you rehydrate it. You tend to get a better product, and sometimes it can be a little tricky when you're weaving it fresh. And weaving fresh materials, you got to really compact everything, really push everything down, because when it dries, it's going to shrink. You might think it would shrink and be tighter, but it actually gets looser sometimes you're not careful. Like the hickory bark is one of the toughest things. Hickory bark looks amazing. That tiger stripe pattern. Yeah, and the other side looks like leather. But yeah, right there. But it's so tough to weave. It's because you have to get it wet, but not too wet. If you get it real wet and it feels like wet, that stuff feels like wet leather, that lashing, even the sides of it. You swear you had wet leather in your hands. But if you have that too wet and it dries out, it actually loosens. And so all those lashings, they get really loose. So the trick with that is to get it to where it's just hydrated just enough. So I soaked it for a while and I'll leave it out for a couple hours before I even start weaving. I'll let it kind of start to dry a little bit and get that sweet spot as if it was fresh and then weave with it from there. So there's a lot of trickiness, and this has been like trial and error over the years. Me realizing, wait a minute, this doesn't work. I have to go back and do it this way, or I have to go back and do it that way. Yeah, a lot of trial and error.
Lots of testing. So this is,
Yeah.
I'm going to show this one again. So this is the hickory bark basket that he was talking about with the lashings and the tiger striping, I believe he called it.
Yeah, that's my nickname for it, because hickory is gray at first, the tree, but when I shave that outer bark down and I shave all the outer bark, that's the inner bark. That striping is what you're getting from the inner bark.
I also wanted to show one of the bottle baskets. So this one is actually the Patron bottle that he wove around. So it is fully in there. You can't pull it out of the basket. It is woven right on there. And then I also
bottle decanter.
Decanter.
Yeah.
And then I also grabbed his mason jar. So it's in there as well, which is kind of cool because then you can put water and like flowers or something out of that, which you traditionally wouldn't be able to do with the basket.
As mentioned, it's a lot of troubleshooting too with basketry. When you're weaving this kind of basketry, you might have an idea in your head, like I want to weave it this way or make this thing, but materials are going like, nope, not going to happen. So there's a lot of troubleshooting. Sometimes materials don't work the way you thought it would, or design's not quite working out. So sometimes I have to change what I intended. And the bark and the vines can dictate, what you're doing, as much as you're like, hey, I want to make this. Material's like, nope, you're going to do it this way or else. That happens sometimes.
There's a lot of interest in the honeysuckle, it seems like. So we've got a couple people asking, Leola is asking, by honeysuckle, do you mean non-native invasive amur, I think is how you would say that, or Japanese honeysuckle? Is it more mature honeysuckle? And how long do the strands need to be?
All excellent questions. The strands, as long as you would like it to be. I mean, it depends how big a basket or what you're weaving. As far as the question on which one, both honeysuckles work. The native one, it's so rare, not rare, but so uncommon. I know spots where it grows, I don't touch it. Let the hummingbirds enjoy the flowers. It's a nice plant. The Asian one, the Japanese honeysuckle, that's the one, I encourage people harvest that because it's invasive. I mean, it takes over my yard all the time. So yeah, always push for work with invasives first if you can. Unless you have enough of something native, then do it. But the native honeysuckle, I would leave it alone because unless you have a yard full of it, this is not very common. If you got a yard full of it, please go and transplant some somewhere else and spread that. But yeah, I always let people try different materials. Like I said, I'm not real big on honeysuckle. I will use it. I do use it, but I really do. I've leaned more and more on the wisteria. That's just the invasive I tend to use and prefer. I mean, I can get way more out of the wisteria personally. Like I said, my apprentice, though, she does like the honeysuckle. So it turns out to be a preference thing with materials.
I'm sorry. The honeysuckle, can that be woven fresh or does it need to be dried out first?
You should dry it out, really. I don't recommend weaving with it fresh. It's one of those things, you got to dry it out. Sounds crazy, dry it out, let it dry for a couple of weeks, and then reconstitute it. The vines only have a shelf life, and I've tried to push this as far as I can, about a year. I can gather a bunch of whatever kind of vine it is. And my basement is climate controlled for all the rattan reed that we have for the classes we teach. And it doesn't last more than a year. But the bark, I've had bark last 20 years. And I reconstitute it, and I can still weave with it, whether it's cedar bark, hickory bark, tulip poplar. Yeah, so bark you can store almost indefinitely for a long time. Well, I wouldn't say indefinitely, I say a lifetime, nearly a lifetime. But vines, you don't have a shelf life on them like rattan reed. So if you have vines and you gather them and dry them and store them, you just treat it like you would rattan. Any other basket weavers out there, you know how it is a rattan reed. It gets too brittle over time. It's the best way to treat it. So yeah, with the honeysuckle, same thing. You want to dry it out. You want to reconstitute later. You can store it for a while. I say 6 months to a year. I wouldn't store it for longer than a year though.
Okay. I am not familiar with this myself, so hopefully you will know. Leola is asking about, I want to say it's phragmites and how you can, and what you can do such as like a thatched roof, or maybe it says Phragmite mats. Is that a material that you've worked with?
Not worked with Phragmites. I know Phragmites. I know people have. It's definitely you're weaving more like a mat. That's doing we've woven mats. It'd be interesting to see. I know for the Lenape, they did a lot of in other native tribes. They bulrush and cattails were woven. Bulrush, same as you probably do it with the Phragmites too, the Phragmites. But cattail was a great one to weave with. That guy Doug Elliott I just mentioned, he used to weave these hats out of cattails. So you could probably do Phragmites. That's something I haven't ventured into because I've never really done much with the flat woven mats. But yeah, it'd be interesting. Somebody could use Phragmites. Please have at it. There's so many of them and they're very invasive. So it'd be nice if somebody found a use for them. Because the, like I was saying, the cattail mats and the hats, those are actually waterproof to a degree. They're good at shedding water. Like I said, his hats is known for water run off of them. And I know the Lenape, when they made their some of their wigwams instead of bark covering, they would actually have thatched cattail mats, and those would actually repel a certain amount of water if you doubled them up right and wove them just right. But yeah, that's something I've not delved into is weaving with rushes and grasses. I like to eventually I'll move into that territory, but you know, as I get to really know a material and like make it like, okay, I mastered this material, I slowly I want to find new materials and work with those.
Right. Ellen asked if you could use one kind of knife, what qualities would that knife have besides being very sharp?
Excellent question. I would actually say you either go big or go small. A good small, like not to tout a brand name, but Mora Neves or hold on a second. More, I mean, I love this company. If they ever want to send me my own, lifetime supply of these, I wouldn't need a lifetime supply. Like something small like this size, a good carbon steel sharp knife. Take good care of it. From this, you could just do a lot of your basketry work. Or another one that works. Don't have one on me right now. It's a parang. It's a large knife from Southeast Asia. They're anywhere from like 10 inches long to 13 inches long. They have very good distal taper, and the way they're formed is the edge is not all the way up the blade, so you can actually grip it lower down on the blade where it's not sharp and do carving work or chopping. I call them vine knives, but in actually harvest rattan that's used for a lot of the basket weaving, like the finished rattan. That's probably what they're using in Malaysia and Indonesia where they're harvesting rattan. The knives there are made instead of machetes. It's more of a woody jungle in Southeast Asia, so they have their knives, unlike machetes in the Western Hemisphere, you find stuff like parangs. A good parang is great for vine work and bark work, or something small like that little carbon steel knife. You just want qualities. You want something that's very, you can handle it real well, and it's very sharp. I'm very big on carbon steel, holds a better edge. It's just my bias, though. Some people like stainless because you don't have to take care of it as much, but carbon will rust on you, but it'll hold a good edge. And it's easier to sharpen.
Great. We've got a specific, what is your favorite material for making really small baskets? And kind of what's the smallest that you work?
With this material, with this, the wild baskets, the smallest I've done is that green glass bottle in the gallery. That was wisteria and cedar bark. So for the smaller work, I would actually opt for honeysuckle too. Honeysuckle is really good for the smaller work. So I would go with wisteria, like really little runners, or probably the honeysuckle. If you're gonna do something smaller than that bottle, and cedar bark, because you can cut cedar bark pretty fine, and you can shave it down a little bit and get some nice little splints off of that.
So this is the basket that is the smallest, so you can kind of see a little bit to scale there. We've also got a great question, I think, from Judith saying, what is the shelf life of your woven baskets?
Excellent question. So far that the nut gathering basket I have there on display, I've had that basket since I wove that in 2021. And I gather with that thing, actually. That's why it's not for sale at the gallery. I gather walnuts and hickory nuts in it, and it's still going strong, just using it seasonally, once a year. So it's holding up. It depends the shelf life. If you're going to not use it, it's going to sit on the shelf somewhere as a display piece. I'm one of those believers in Mr. Baskets, whether it's rattan or this. Basket weavers are divided on that. And some say don't mist it. I say mist it every 6 months. Take a spray bottle so it doesn't get too brittle, and get a quick little bath with a spray bottle, just water, every 6 months. And that'll help preserve the basket. If you're going to use these, though, which you can, I mean, I make my baskets so you could take it out in the woods and forage with it. It's not going to hold up for years on end if you're constantly using it. Or if you're just seasonally using it, like that nut gathering basket I have, you could get quite a few years out of it. Eventually, though, wear and tear, baskets break down. But if it's sitting on a shelf, it's not going to last indefinitely. It's rare for baskets to last indefinitely. Old baskets are hard to find because it's a material that breaks down, whether it's reeds, whether it's bark, whether it's vines, whether it's processed rattan. It's not meant to last as long as, say, a glass bottle or even a piece of leather is probably on par with it. Leather, I think, breaks down about as much, but a glass bottle or a forged piece of metal is going to last way longer.
Would you say that the bark or the runners would be more durable over time?
Excellent question. I would say the bark, and that's based on what will last in storage. And that bark lasts indefinitely, especially something like hickory bark. Hickory bark is tough. It takes a beating. It's tough to work with, but it's very satisfying. You get a piece done with hickory bark. And I'd put hickory bark on par with leather, close to it in durability and lasting over the years. The vines are not going to last as long. They're going to break down. They're going to dry out. They're going to get a little more brittle quicker. And that's really based on just my use of baskets I've made and storage of materials.
Right. So your unique, solid bark ones are going to have a longer shelf life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Somebody buys one of them, they'd be handing down their kids probably, so sitting on a shelf somewhere. It's not being used. Yeah, somebody will be like, hey, is it gonna be mine one day? I wish it was like that, but maybe one day.
We have a couple other unique material related questions. Betsy would like to know if you've ever tried weaving with other horse related things like straw, hay, baling twine.
No, but that'd be interesting. I'm always open to, I've only woven with horsehair that one time. I still have that basket somewhere, but I've been kicking around the idea of weaving with turkey beard. Not the plant, but the actual turkeys, they have beards. But horse related, no, I can't say I have. If somebody has an idea to weave with something like that, I say go for it. Try it. Try new materials. Try pushing the envelope. Try, making a basket out of anything you can. Especially somebody says, "Oh, you can't make a basket out of that." Try it. I often tell my students, I love my students prove me wrong sometimes. I actually enjoy that. that shows okay, I guess I'm a pretty good teacher. Okay, they just did that and I told them they couldn't do it. I enjoy that.
Well, it looks like we have run out of time. So I want to say thank you all again for joining us this evening. This lecture will be available on our YouTube channel in just a few days if you want to revisit it, or if you want to share it with your friends. If you had any other unanswered questions, maybe tap them into the video there and we can try and get some answers for you. And if you have yet to stop in, Carty's work is going to be on display here in the gallery until April 22nd, and we're open from 10 to 5 p.m. every day. So you could come see these in person, and he has a great interactive table where you could touch the materials as well. So I just want to wish you guys a great rest of your night.
Thank you, everybody.
Hello and thank you so much for watching this program. Peters Valley would like to thank its sponsors for making programs like this possible. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Peters Valley's channel to receive more like it in the future.